Number 8. Amanda Myers.
Does they have to go that far? I'm a cop too. I know how this works.
In February of 2020, the police in Palmer, Ohio, were dispatched to a local bar after receiving reports of a minor traffic accident in the parking lot. Upon their arrival, law enforcement encountered Amanda Myers, a Kelly's Island police officer who claimed to have been working a side job at the bar that day. Myers, who'd reportedly been involved in the fender bender, proceeded to name-drop other public officials in an attempt to validate her story to the other officers and prevent them from questioning her level of intoxication. She stated that she knew the owner of the bar and indicated that his brother is the prosecutor. He knows the mayor. We're all cool. Myers admitted to having 2 or 3 drinks over the course of the day, but refused to submit to any sobriety tests. Despite her attempts to use her law enforcement position to avoid getting into trouble, the 29-year-old woman was ultimately taken into custody. She was charged with 3 misdemeanors: operating a vehicle under the influence, refusal with a prior conviction, and reasonable control. Subsequent reports indicated that Myers had only been convicted of the latter charge, but it wasn't made clear what the extent of her consequent penalties were. Number 7. Martin HYDE. On February the 14th of 2022, Florida police officer Julia Beskin pulled over a vehicle in Sarasota that she'd clocked traveling at nearly 30 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. Beskin approached the car and informed its driver, Republican congressional candidate Martin HYDE, of his alleged infraction. In an attempt to avoid a ticket, the man indicated that he knew the police chief, telling Beskin that she was making an unwise career decision by pulling him over. The officer then told HYDE that she didn't recognize him before calling a traffic stop in to her dispatcher. Beskin claimed that the man was being extremely uncooperative and told the dispatcher that she'd given him a total of 3 tickets: 1 for speeding, 1 for failing to produce a valid registration, and another for texting while driving. In the officer's body cam footage, the congressional candidate was later shown insulting Beskin's immigrant status, demanding to speak with her supervisor, and repeatedly accusing her of lying about his traffic violations. In a further display of indignation, HYDE attempted to use his perceived influence to get out of receiving the tickets, asking Beskin if she knew she was dealing with a congressional candidate. In the incident's aftermath, HYDE uploaded an apologetic social media post in which he admitted, "I have faults, and one of them is to be overly aggressive on occasion when I'm challenged." On August the 23rd of 2022, HYDE lost in the primary of Florida's 16th congressional district election, only garnering roughly 14% of the vote. Number 6. Darlene Bradley. The mayor of a small city in central Florida was taken into police custody in December of 2017 after it emerged that she'd been using dead people's disabled parking permits to park at City Hall. The Polk County Sheriff's Office had initiated an investigation into the suspect, Davenport Mayor Darlene Bradley, after she'd been filmed parking in a handicapped parking space outside the government building. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Bradley's home, which led to the discovery of 2 disabled parking permits that had been issued to individuals who had already passed away. The mayor was consequently arrested on felony charges of using a deceased person's identification as well as possessing an altered or counterfeit decal. Those charges were ultimately dismissed after Bradley agreed to a plea deal in which she was sentenced to 6 months of probation and ordered to pay roughly $420 in fines. Number 5. Rodolfo Lopez Ibarra. In December of 2016, Mexican authorities apprehended Rodolfo El Nito Lopez Ibarra, the regional leader of the Beltran Leyva cartel in Nuevo Leon, Sinaloa, and Mexico City. At the time of the powerful criminal's detainment, the police also reportedly seized a level 6 armored SUV, a .38 caliber handgun, and $22,000 in cash. While he was being taken into custody, Lopez Ibarra allegedly offered law enforcement a $500,000 bribe in exchange for his release. The arresting officers refused, to which the cartel leader responded by threatening to use his criminal influence to have them murdered. The incident marked the second documented occasion in which Lopez Ibarra had attempted to bribe the police. Back in 2009, the man had been arrested along with 12 of his gunmen right before taking off from the airport in Acapulco on board a Cessna airplane. As he was being arrested with multiple firearms and a grenade in his possession, Lopez Ibarra told the officials he'd pay them $1 million if they let him go. When that proposition had been refused, the enraged drug lord vowed to exact revenge against the officers and soldiers, telling them, "You don't know who you are messing with. I am the new plaza boss." Number 4. Sandra Cunningham. On the morning of March the 4th of 2021, a New Jersey state senator was pulled over by the police after colliding with a pair of cars parked near her Jersey City residence. Prior to the incident, then 70-year-old Sandra Cunningham had represented the state's 31st legislative district since 2007. Throughout her interaction with law enforcement, the woman attempted to use her political influence and connections to avoid being punished for her actions. Immediately upon initiating the traffic stop, the officer at the scene noted that Cunningham was displaying clear signs of intoxication. She reportedly dropped a collection of cards on the ground when trying to produce her ID, then had trouble clearly stating her address and even confessed to feeling unsteady while performing a field sobriety test. The lawmaker denied having struck the parked vehicles, instead claiming to have hit a snowbank while making a turn. When the officer told Cunningham that she was being taken into custody, the state senator asked for Jersey City's Public Safety Director, James Shea, by name. Her request wasn't honored, however, and she was arrested on a DWI charge shortly thereafter. In May of 2022, after 14 months of legal proceedings, Cunningham's charges were dismissed when prosecutors decided there wasn't enough evidence to prove their case. Number 3. Humberto Benitez Trevino. In the spring of 2013, it was reported that the daughter of a Mexican government official had thrown a tantrum after the owner of Maximo Bistro in Mexico City told her she couldn't be seated right away without a reservation. The young woman, identified as Andrea Benitez Gonzalez, proceeded to get even angrier when a vacant table was subsequently offered to customers who'd been waiting longer than her. For their perceived mistreatment of her, Benitez Gonzalez threatened the restaurant with governmental repercussions, indicating that her father, Humberto Benitez Trevino, was the federal attorney general for consumer protection. Only hours after the incident had occurred, federal inspectors arrived at the establishment with official suspended signs per Benitez Trevino's orders. The restaurant reportedly had 2 of its permits suspended, one regarding reservations and the other regarding liquor sales. The episode sparked outrage among the general public, which criticized Benitez Trevino for what was widely considered an abuse of power on his part. The man's daughter was also given the derisive nickname Lady Profeco. In the wake of the incident, the following month, Benitez Trevino was fired from his senior position within the Mexican government by President Enrique Peña Nieto, despite publicly apologizing for his retaliatory overreaction towards Maximo Bistro. Today's topic was requested by Hip Hop Struggle. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Monica Youngblood. New Mexico State Representative Monica Youngblood was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence of alcohol on May the 20th of 2018. In the late hours of the evening, the 41-year-old woman had been stopped at a sobriety checkpoint in Albuquerque. Officers immediately noted that Youngblood's eyes were bloodshot and she smelled strongly of alcohol, while also indicating that she was slurring her speech. The politician was asked to perform 4 separate field sobriety tests, all of which She failed, and she subsequently refused to submit to a breathalyzer. In nearly 40 minutes of police body cam footage released in the traffic stop's aftermath, Youngblood was shown tearfully pleading with the officers not to arrest her. She also attempted to use her political positions as a legislator to appeal to the officers and escape criminal charges, stating, "I always stood up for you guys." It later emerged that in her capacity as a state representative, Youngblood had been a staunch supporter of harsher sentences for DUI offenders. She was taken into custody and following a nearly 4-hour bench trial convicted of aggravated drunken driving. Youngblood was consequently sentenced to 48 hours in jail, 1 year of probation, mandatory use of an ignition interlock for 1 year, attendance at DUI school, 24 hours of community service, and payment of court costs and fees. She ultimately lost her re-election bid to her Democratic challenger in November of 2018. Number 1. KWAME Kilpatrick. KWAME Kilpatrick was elected as the 72nd mayor of Detroit in 2002 after spending the previous 5 years as a member of the state's House of Representatives. The Michigan native's tenure in office, which lasted for 2 terms, was fraught with constant controversy and allegations of misconduct. During his first year, Kilpatrick was accused of organizing a wild party involving exotic dancers at the Manoogian Mansion, a city-owned property in which the mayor of Detroit resides. At one point that evening, Kilpatrick's wife arrived home unexpectedly and proceeded to physically assault one of the dancers. The mayor and other police officials were subsequently investigated for allegedly abusing their power to cover up the details of the party. In April of 2003, an exotic dancer named Tamara Green, who was said to have been in attendance at the Manoogian Mansion event, was murdered. Prior to her death, Green had been set to testify on record about the party, and it was thus theorized that she'd been killed in a deliberate hit by a member of the Detroit Police Department. To stop that from happening, Kilpatrick's tumultuous mayoral career ultimately culminated with his resignation in 2008 after he'd been accused of lying during the police whistleblower trial that resulted from the Manoogian Mansion ordeal. According to court records, Kilpatrick had falsely testified that he didn't have an affair with his chief of staff and had also allegedly given misleading testimony about the dismissal of a deputy police chief. He was convicted of perjury as well as obstruction of justice and served 99 days in jail. 2 years later, Kilpatrick served additional time behind bars for a probation violation before eventually being indicted on new felony charges in connection to what was described as a pattern of extortion, bribery, and fraud by some of the city's most prominent officials. The former mayor was ultimately convicted of 24 counts, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering, and was consequently sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. In January of 2021, President Donald Trump commuted Kilpatrick's sentence, allowing him to obtain release 20 years early without having his conviction vacated. He was, however, still subject to almost $4.8 million in restitution payments, as well as the 3 years of probation handed down in his original sentence. Thanks for watching. Would you rather work for an abusive boss but get paid well, or own your dream car but have its max speed set at 45 miles per hour? Let us know in the comments section below.